All right. Is this the clicker for the slides?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So as Steve mentioned, I'm Braden Savage. I work at the New York Department of Health in the Bureau of Water Supply Protection, which deals primarily with our public water system regulations, like with the New York City watershed and emerging contaminants like PFAS and 1,4-dioxane. In my section, the Water Systems Control and Analysis, we are responsible for enforcing our protection against Legionella regulation concerning cooling towers and healthcare facilities. And then we also do some of these EHC, the Environmental Health Capacity, grant-funded activities like some of this private well work. We also do some harmful algal bloom monitoring and there was something else, but it's gone. So quick agenda, just a little bit of background of private wells in New York State and their status in like a regulatory context, and then an overview of our EHC components, and then kind of what's next for all of our well work that's funded on EHC is the federal funding landscape changes a little bit. Yes. Oops, yeah. So in New York State, similar to Tennessee and Michigan, they're functionally unregulated. There's regulation concerning the siting and construction and like decommissioning of those wells, but between those things, once it's built and it's in like these residential wells, there's no like testing requirements. There's technically some private well regulation. I think it's part 75 that recommends some limits and analytes to test for, but there's no enforcement component. So it functionally doesn't exist for a lot of these, for a lot of the county health departments for sure. We have some really rough estimates of how many wells are active in New York State. About 1 million wells serving 4 million people, probably. I think that's from one piece of literature that was using other states that track this better than we do, and then extrapolating it to other states. But yeah, those are pretty rough numbers. We do have the well driller log. I think some other states have that too, where when the well is drilled by a certified well driller, they'll generate this log that has the address and some other well information like depth and what kind of geologies they hit on the way down and the water table depth. And then the New York Department of Environmental Conservation does track that, but that started in 1999, and there are a lot of wells that were drilled prior to that. So there's just a lot we don't know, and you don't know if those wells are still active, if they've been abandoned. We've seen our fair share of just abandoned, uncapped, not decommissioned wells that are just sitting out in a field somewhere. Right, so how we break up some of these components on the EHC. So our component A was our informatics, where we kind of tried to generate or build this map of these layers that we thought were associated with increased risk for private well owners. We have some flood zones, karst or carbonate bedrocks, arsenic layer, and an agricultural district layer. The arsenic layer is just a layer of indicating increased probability of arsenic above a certain level. I think it was a relatively low level. We generally don't see too much arsenic in New York. And then these other components. So we have a well sampling component where is a continuation of our Safe Watch work. We actually would go out and sample wells for people and then provide them results, answer any questions, give them an explanation of what we're sampling, why we're doing it, why we think these analytes are important to track. And we also do a lot of more community targeted samples. We'll work with the Rural Water Association to identify towns that have specific contaminant concerns. Some of them have old junkyards, or they had some kind of industrial process that was in their town a while ago, and they have heavy metal concerns in the groundwater. In one of the towns, they claimed that the mercury thermometer was invented there, so they had mercury concerns, and we didn't find any mercury. But in a lot of these towns, they do use this information. Usually it's like a source water protection plan, or to support that, or if they were interested in getting community sewer, or if they wanted to introduce a public water system into the area. And after we do talk to these towns, we're like a general, constant source of communication for them. We provide as much information as we can. We talked to one of these towns that we sampled in, oh man, I would say 2019. We still talk to them almost on a weekly basis because they started up their own kind of sampling plan for mostly just coliform nitrates. But we still talk to them a lot. And then we have a database that we have been trying to get kick-started, but it's tough when there's no, regulatory requirements to sample. So everything is voluntary, and we've collaborated with some private environmental labs. And for the most part, it was successful to start, and then it's kind of petered off with volunteers. And then we have a private well repair program that we piloted with a county, and now we've kind of moved that into our New York State Healthy Neighborhoods program. And then we also had some outreach and ed materials that we're always, updating and improving. Yeah. Okay, so the private well database, just a little bit on this. So it's a QR code for it, but if you just search private wells New York State, you'll probably find it too. We have the flood zones and the bedrock and the arsenic zones and the agricultural zones. We're still talking about adding new layers to it, but I don't know if that'll end up happening. So with our private the environmental lab collaboration, we have them add just this little box to the RFA, and the well owner or whoever is collecting the sample can just check it off, and then that data is sent to us. It started out really great. When we were in the capital region where our office is, it's that lab, we've worked at that lab since pre-COVID, so they were happy to do it. The signups, the volunteers have been really great. And then as we tried to move outside of that capital region, outside into more rural areas, those labs are less willing to collaborate on this. You can see here that where that big blob is where that's the capital region, that's where our area is, that's where we get most of our data. And then as I've tried to contact these labs in more rural areas, I've been laughed at on the phone numerous times, which the labs themselves are generally willing to do it, but they're afraid of alienating their customer base, which I understand. So I've tried to scheme a few ways to get some data from some of these more rural areas, but it hasn't panned out yet. And then here's that with the risk layers in pretty much the same map. So in the repair program, our goal was to, provide direct support to these well owners that don't have the knowledge or the means to identify a deficient well, or, some of these wells were pretty, in bad shape, and they may not have had the means to get those wells back into working order. We had to identify some, a set of deficiencies that were common enough that we could pay to have them fixed, because this was on our EHC grant. So the way the funding reimbursement worked was you needed like the line items with the prices, and it wasn't the right mechanism for this, I think, to provide reimbursement to the county health department that we collaborated with. But we were still able to get some wells repaired and get some UV systems to, well owners that needed it. Let's see. Right, so I think one of the main issues, since we don't have, the private well regulation within the state, or functionally don't have one, a lot of counties just don't have that knowledge base, and they're not comfortable really working with private wells because there's no requirement for them to do that. So it was hard to find a county that both had that familiarity, because some counties do have, a pretty developed private well program, but also had the bandwidth to take on, an additional project. But we eventually did find one in the southern tier of New York. It's one of those counties that borders Pennsylvania. And then trying to figure out what we could pay for, what makes sense, probably like new well caps, raised well heads that aren't the 14 inches above grade, I believe. Maybe some UV systems, but those are a little expensive for the funding we had. And then we, in the line items on what we could pay for, we tried to do a special projects just to cover situations that didn't fall under any of the ones we had imagined. And then ideally, we were trying to imagine, well, we'll take a coliform sample before we do any interventions or repair, and then a coliform and E. coli afterward, just so maybe at the end of it, we'll have some kind of metric that, this work we did improved the quality, the water quality of these wells. But that didn't really end up happening. So I think some of it was probably our fault. We kind of left a lot of this up to the jurisdiction or the determination of the county health department, because this was a pilot project. We've never done anything like this before. So there was an issue with some of the coliforms being collected, and because of the, the funding with the grant and how the reimbursements worked, the invoices had to be, line for line, had to match what we were approved to spend on, and that the funding period changes every year. So if those invoices towards the end of the fiscal year aren't submitted on time, then we aren't able to cover the costs that the county incurred when they performed these repairs. So that it wasn't great. We weren't able to pay for some of the work that they did, which is a shame. I think that was one of the biggest issues that we ran into, trying to review, and they were working within the county with multiple certified well drillers and contractors who are quoting this work differently and breaking all the work down differently and trying to get that to fit within our, our reimbursement grant approved boxes. It wasn't great. Yeah, so luckily it was a pilot project. And pilot projects are great. It's a great place to make mistakes. Maybe some of the stuff we asked for was unrealistic, but we definitely learned a lot. I know the county did too. And we definitely thought we needed to pivot this project and move it away from us a little bit, like allocate the funding to somebody who's already distributing funds to counties for work like this. So we've decided to, I had one more slide. You can see we were able to, I think this data is a little outdated, but provide repairs, interventions to around 30 wells, 30 well owners. We did new caps, UV systems, a reverse osmosis system. We converted some wells that were still in a pit to pitless wells, raised the wellheads, added pitless adapters. So, the median repair cost around $280. That's, value that was delivered directly to these well owners. Even if it wasn't a ton, it's still, it's work they didn't have done before. So it's something. And they got to interact with the county health department, who is really knowledgeable on these private wells. So now they have that contact, and if they have any questions, maybe they'll be more willing to reach out if they have any issues. Yeah. Here's just some case studies, some images from the field that they took. You can see that the well is pretty rusted. There's no way you're getting a well cap on that, so they had to put a couple on it and put some new casing on so that they could fit a wellhead to it. This one was a little crazy. The well owner had no idea where the well was because it was buried. So they had to get a backhoe and just do some exploratory digging to try to find it. And it's situations like this that are hard to fit in those reimbursement boxes for the the grant funding. But ultimately they did find it and they were able to raise it, pitless adapter, put a new wellhead on or well cap on it. It's good to go. Here's one where I believe this well did have a pitless adapter on it, but they never extended the wellhead out of the pit, so it was in this localized floodplain. But this one actually ended up being an issue on our end because you can see there's some concrete and some wood slats above it, and it costed way more than we were expecting to remove some of that so that they could work on the well. And that was a huge issue with our grant administrators. Yeah, so next steps for this is we wanted to remove some of the administration away from us and to somebody who is already working with counties on this, or on similar issues. The Healthy Neighborhoods Program, which I think is an interstate program. I think other states may have that. We've trying to pilot this now with 2 other counties, Madison County, which is like in the Finger Lakes region, and then Clinton County, which is in the North Country. They're bordering Canada. And we ideally, this repair program, there'd be funding available to any county that's a healthy neighborhoods program. So maybe you would streamline implementation for these county health departments, because for these healthy neighborhoods programs, they're already bringing, county staff into these homes for different kind of assessments and interventions. So maybe while they're on site for some other kind of assessment, they'll see a private well that's in pretty sorry shape and can offer to at least provide some information on what they can do, or maybe even directly pay for its repair, which was our hope. But unfortunately, Clinton County had some staffing issues, and I think, had to pretty much stop they already had a private well program, and they've had to stop that almost entirely at this point, I think, which is a shame. And Madison County is more focused on just increasing the sampling they were already doing and providing to county residents rather than repair, which, I mean, it's fine. We wanted to make this a little bit more flexible so counties could implement it in a way that works best for them. So then, this is my scheme I was talking about earlier. I was hoping that as more counties adopted this program and sampled private wells more, and they would, generate all this private well data from the lab results, so we'd get like active well locations, and we would get some kind of measure of groundwater quality or private well quality, that we could incorporate that into the database we were trying to build too, but that hasn't worked out either. So then our community sampling program, this is where we work with the Rural Water Association to identify towns and have some kind of contamination, or maybe they're just interested in learning more about the well water quality in their town. We'll go in, we'll do a lot of surveying just to get everyone's contact information, their addresses, when they're available for us to come in, and then we'll go in like over 2 or 3 days and sample 25 to 30 wells. It's a pretty busy couple days, but you get a lot of information out of it. I think it's very valuable for the homeowners involved and for the town. We're actually, our most recent one that we did in, I think last summer, we're going out next week to give them a workshop in collaboration with our local chapter of the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, RCAP Solutions. So that should be a ton of fun. Yeah, so here's just an example of some of the information we're collecting when we sample these wells. And this is kind of one of these aggregate readouts that we provide to the town. Nothing too crazy, just like the average values of what we saw. And then just to contextualize some of these numbers, we use some kind of recommended limit, which have been collected from numerous sources, because not all of these analytes really have like an MCL or an action level or a health-based value. Some of these are just aesthetic, contaminants that aren't too important. But I think having just some kind of recommended limit, even if it's not, a harm to human health, it helps to just contextualize these numbers for these well owners that don't generally look at these kind of numbers. And then we'll tend to break it down by how many of those analytes were in excess of whatever our recommended limit was. And then to contextualize those, we'll provide it to some kind of estimate of our statewide data. Usually those are just all the well owners that we personally have collected, just to give them some context, because 66% of wells positive for coliform, is that good or bad? It's hard to tell sometimes. But statewide, we have, I think, maybe a higher rate of coliforms than I've seen in some of these presentations. We have about, I think the new number is around 44%. This is kind of outdated. So when we went to this town and we saw 66% of the samples come back positive for coliform, we thought it was important to point that out, that there could be a more, a bigger issue in the town. And then here's one that I've kind of stopped using, just trying to break down how many exceedances per well in the town. But when you're using, hardness, all these wells have such hard water and the conductivity is really high. I think this chart makes the issue look a little bit more severe than it actually is. like 89% of wells had at least one value in excess of whatever range or whatever value we were using. So I've stopped using this one, but I just wanted to include it because we did use it for a little bit. And then this recent town we sampled too, they had a ton of arsenic detections. I think it's around 70% of the wells we sampled had a detection for arsenic. Only 3% were in excess of the MCL. But for us, that was extreme. We've never seen, we generally don't see that much arsenic. So when we had 70% of these wells come back with an arsenic detection, that was another big issue for us. But as far as our EHC projects go, I think that's about it. With the CDC funding and all that changing, I think most of these projects will probably come to an end this summer. And then just to kind of continue that train of thought, I have this, I put these slides in when I thought for sure I was going to NEHA and my abstract was accepted. And I was working on some of the analysis that I was going to do for this, but now I'm not so sure if we're going to be able to go to NEHA to present on this work. So maybe I can talk about it now if I've got some time.
You have stood up 10 minutes.
Okay, great. Yeah, okay, great. Okay. So basically what we were doing, these are the two towns that we sampled. They were directly adjacent to each other. This was in Tompkins County, which is like where Ithaca is and Cornell. This is the Finger Lakes region. The one on the town on the north is that black outline above. That's the one we just did this past summer. And then the one below it we did a couple summers ago. I think it was 2019, no, 2021, that must be it. And we collected this, and we initially thought because the Northtown Ulysses had such a high coliform positive rate, the 66%, compared to the town below, Enfield, we thought this could be a cool analysis. We can examine features and factors that may be associated with this coliform positivity, maybe identify something that is causing these coliform numbers to be so different between these towns. But after a couple tests, a couple chi-square tests and stuff, it wasn't quite significant between these two towns. So then I started looking at, well, maybe if I just look at all these well samples together, maybe we can identify some features that might be associated with, this the coliform positivity, right? So what I ended up doing is looking at this bedrock geology, which had no significant relationship. Neither did the agricultural districts, but in the middle, that superficial geology, there were some significant relationships with the proportion of coliform positive samples. So if you can see that brown layer, that's a silt and clay layer, and that was in a logistic model that was significantly associated with increased coliform positives in these two towns. And then the pink layer is glacial till, and that was significantly associated with fewer coliform detections. I think there's definitely still more work to be done, and I'm still working on a random forest model for some feature extraction just to see if there are any nonlinear relationships or any other relationships that may be predictive of coliform positivity. And I think I have some insane box plots. Yeah. So this one is not worth looking at. This is just what I had at the time because I was working on this. These slides were due. But this one I think is the most important. This one just has all the non-detects removed because when you're working with environmental data, you get a ton of non-detects which aren't technically zero. They're hard to manage sometimes. But the one thing I do want to point out is that in the first pass of that random forest model, the feature it identified as most useful in predicting coliform positivity was pH. And I've since updated this where I've broken it down between towns and between coliform positive samples and coliform negative samples. And it seems like there might be something to examine there. I would take that with a large grain of salt because that was the first pass of that model, but just something to look at. Maybe someone else will be able to do some analysis on that after my funding ends. So here's our contact info. I'll come back to this in a sec. I just want to show some. See, there's just some of these repairs from the that pilot project. Some of these wells were in pretty sorry shape, and that's one of the UV systems we got to install on the left. And then here are just some pictures that we've collected when we've been doing this community sampling. I think if you've ever seen a private well presentation from New York State before, you've probably seen some of these pictures. We always point out the one on the left with that big cistern and that coffee can duct taped to the pole. That was the well owner called the squirrel or the chipmunk dipper to get out all the drowned chipmunks. So we always have to bring that up. Yeah. Okay, I think that's all I got. All right, I'll see how many I can get through. How have you tried to get data from these more rural areas, even if it hasn't worked yet? So aside from working with the environmental labs in these areas, we've tried to, that's why we're trying to get the Healthy Neighborhood Program with the private well repair program, so that maybe some of these rural counties will take up these projects to get more involved in private wells, but we just haven't seen it happening. I think there's just not a lot of appetite to work with these private wells, unfortunately. But beyond those, I think that's all we've tried. Aside from, you know, the community sampling project too, where we do try to target these towns in more rural areas. No, so that was we've only done that with one county, that pilot project that had issues with the reimbursement and invoicing. And I think they would still be doing that project, but we've tried to take the administration away from us and disperse it through the Healthy Neighborhoods program. It was just, I mean, these county health departments are really busy in trying to get them to do this in this probably much different way than they do all their other work. Probably wasn't helpful for them. But yeah, hopefully things are better through the Healthy Neighborhoods program, but uptake's been pretty slow in that too, so. So I actually wasn't involved in the grant writing or the project proposal for this. So I think, well, what I would have done is tried to make these costs way more general, because trying to say exactly like $200 for a well cap or $500 for a well extension, yeah, that's a tough one for me, because I'm generally not on the funding side, but whoever asked that, if you could send us an email. I know my coworker, my supervisor, was supposed to be here, and he was more on the funding side of stuff, so he could talk more to that question probably. Oh, so the well logs themselves, I'm not sure if they're digitized. I know just the location that the well is at is digitized through the Department of Environmental Conservation, and I'm pretty sure that's a public map that you can go look at on the New York State GIS Clearinghouse. The well logs themselves, I don't know. I think a lot of these, especially because they were so old, from before 1999, I missed that. I don't think there were well logs before 1999. At least they weren't required in New York State in any kind of standardized format. So those are just ghost wells. We don't know. So the environmental lab volunteers, we'd send them an email, just like with a blurb, what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, what data we're looking for, why we're looking for it. We'd send them an email. Some of them responded really quickly, and we were able to work with them really fast and get something up and running. Some of them would ghost 3 emails and then laugh at me when I called them. But for the most part, that's what we did. Just send them emails and ask if they wanted to volunteer, because all of it had to be voluntary. So we did. We wanted to, for that private well repair project, to sample at specific points, but I don't know if I think that the county we were working with was having issues with the environmental labs that were in their area. So they say some of the samples were lost by the labs, and that was the goal ultimately, but it didn't happen that way, unfortunately.
We're good. Okay, thank you. Let's see the last